After I worked with teachers for many years, I realized these are the things that I do most consistently to help during co-planning into structure. And these things help co-planning to be more effective and efficient. Okay? So let's look at high yield co-planning first. High yield co-planning is my concept is, I know that co-teaching gets a lot of attention. However, co-planning is where the magic is at. If you remember nothing else in this session, it's that co-planning is co-teaching because the things that we do in co-planning affects and impacts and structures co-teaching. Just like in the way we don't show up to class without planning our lessons, in the same way we don't show up to co-teaching without co-planning our lessons. Now, how do we do that in a way that's really time efficient? Let's look here at this document first. I'm going to share with you a metaphor. I'm going to give you pebbles, a rock or stone, and a really big stone, and sand. And I'm going to have you put them all into this vase, and this vase can hold all of it tightly. So in which order would you put the things in? Would you put the sand in first? Would you put the stone in first, or would you put the pebbles in first? And then after that, what would you put in? Can you type in the group chat? What would you put in for everything to fit in? Dan said stone, pebbles, sand. The bigger rock, pebbles, then the sand. Sand, stone, and pebbles. Okay. So there's different ways to do that, right? I want to share with you, my suggestion is to start with the gigantic stone. Here's why. When we co-plan, at the beginning when we co-plan, instead of focusing on the small little things like what are we planning tomorrow, focus on the big things, such as designing projects, long-term groupings, designing assessments, huge, creating rubrics, thinking about producing extended writing. What are students going to do by the end for their writing? What are students supposed to be reading throughout the unit? Maybe we're content mapping. Maybe we're unit planning with our teachers. If we start with the stone, this leaves all the space left for the pebbles, and then finally the sand. Here's the pebbles. So it'll go in, it'll fill in, but most of the space is already taken up by the stone. And then the granular part are the things we can plan, such as low yield co-planning items, such as today's lessons, tomorrow's lesson, a bulletin board, or a one-time graphic organizer. And a one-time graphic organizer, for example, is just that. It's not as impactful as planning an assessment, which can be used through multiple months, multiple weeks, and days. But a graphic organizer can be used possibly only once, and then we move on to the next lesson. When we plan with low yield co-planning, we become an aid. But when we plan with high yield co-planning, we become an equal designer of instruction. Our content teachers, our colleagues say, wow, it's so great to plan with you because the things that we plan together or used again and again and again, that helps all students. And yes, planning tomorrow's lesson, today's lesson, and the bulletin board and a graphic organizer is important and it develops a relationship, but it doesn't have the most impact when you only have 60 minutes per week, 45 minutes per week, or 90 minutes per 2 weeks. Because if you plan today's lesson, the next time you meet them, you already have to start all over again. But if you plan on the project level, on the high yield co-planning level, teachers you'll already have an idea of what they're doing right away because you've already planned it. Can you type in the group chat right away? What are your thoughts about what I just shared about this idea of high yield co-planning? Here they come. Great. Long term versus short term. Exactly, Miriam. We're thinking about the long term. And Binju said, we're future proof. Yes, we're thinking about the future. We're proofing it instead of thinking about tomorrow's lesson. I've never thought about that. Sarah said student focus, curriculum focus, accessibility for students. Yes, every single day. Even if you can't be in the class with students every single day, the document that you created for them that's going to be used for months for the entire unit is going to be there to help them. And Alan said, oh, based on this, oh, sorry, that's my alarm. I failed 70% aid and 25 designer. This is because everything is already planned, and that's okay. You're not failing, Alice. If it's already planned, that's fantastic. Now all we have to do is structure what's already planned. I love this. Let me share with you what this looks like for me when I plan with my teachers. Because I prioritize co-planning, this was my schedule when I used to work at Saigon South International School. Lovely teachers, I love them. As you notice, I only have a few white spots. And my white spots means that those are meeting times that are open. But I decided to give up my personal planning time to co-plan with Ken, to co-plan with Rob and Sarah and Sana and Jay. That's because when we do this, the things that I co-plan is going to help students in the future. So I'm okay with taking my own personal time to co-planning with teachers. Let me share with you an example from actually grade 5 when I worked at Saigon South International School, a fabulous school, by the way. This is something that in grade 5, I sat down with a colleague and she said, okay, we're going to be by the next unit, we're going to be looking at narrative structure or narrative writing. Students will produce a narrative piece of text by the end of the unit. And we took out a rubric, which was already created by Lucy Calkins, and we adapted it for our own thing. And we looked at the rubric. And in the rubric, there were 3 things, such as structure, development, and conventions. Those are the pebbles. The rubric itself, the rubric itself is the stone. So when we started planning, we didn't look at tomorrow's lesson. We didn't look at next week's lesson. We looked at, okay, what's the big assessment? And the assessment is the narrative writing. And what are the different parts of the narrative piece of text? It's structure, convention, and development. And then when we looked at the structure, we saw that the structure called for lead, transitions, and ending. And ding, 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 these became our sand. These became the things we taught on a daily basis, or these were our mini lesson plans. For example, we started our narrative unit with thinking about the lead, introducing the main character and giving them a specific location. And so we taught that lesson. But this was defined because of our big rock, which is the rubric. So these are the 3 questions that I asked my teachers, and I asked this in this order at the beginning of the unit. So what are students doing by the end of the unit? When I have that question, it formulates and it structures our co-planning for the rest of the unit. Once I know that, I say, okay, so now that I know you want students to do a narrative piece of writing, what are students going to do at the beginning, middle, and end of the unit? So the beginning might be lead, a structure, the next one might be development, and the last one might be convention. So now we know we have a structure. So then when I come and do my students' classes, when I co-teach with my teachers, I know that, okay, are we at the beginning, middle, or end? Because we've already planned that out. And the last thing I ask is on a weekly basis, so I get to plan with them. After planning the assessment, I ask, what are the things students doing by the end of this week? So that is called high yield co-planning, thinking about what are the big things that we can plan, that if we plan this in 60 minutes or 45 minutes, that it's going to be used again and again and again. Usually this is the assessment. Now let's move to the next strategy that I want to share with you. It's called deconstruct and sequence, which is very tied to the assessment. So deconstruct means this. You take all of the parts of the assessment and you identify it. And then you sequence it. For example, here, let me give you a non-teaching example. Let's say you want to cook a vegan burger. And you would say, okay, let's go to all the ingredients. So we go to to our refrigerator and we pull our things out. So, and I pull out the lettuce, the bun, the cheese, the patty, and the tomato. But this is not the sequence. What I would do is I would put out the bun, toast it. Oh, I would first heat up the veggie patty. Okay? And then I would have cheese on the bun so it's nice and toasted. Then I would put the tomato after the lettuce and then the bun in the middle. And then I would put the top bun down. So that's the sequencing part. Let me show you an example here. This is an example. Let's say that you want to write a biography about Cleopatra. Like you're going to have students say at the end of the unit, you're going to create a biography about a world leader, an ancient civilization leader. So so a student might pick like Cleopatra, for example. And you identified that the students have to write about accomplishments, death, administration, and birth. Can you type in the group chat? How would you sequence this if you were giving this document to students? What order would the report come in? Can you type in the group chat? Magdala said, birth, administration, accomplishments, and death. Yep. And everyone is saying that too. Right? Birth, chronologically, that's right. Hey, and death. Thanks, Voodoo. We do that because this order that you just created helps students both in their research and also in their writing. That's it. Now let me give you an example of me doing this actually with my students. So here, deconstruct and sequence. Here is a document here. It's a screenshot. I screenshot this. You're gonna see this is a multiple page document, but my 8th graders are writing a children's book right now about human rights. So when I thought about this, I said, okay, what are the different parts of the assessment? Whether it's the prologue, the children's story, and then the epilogue. I identified it, the different parts, but I also sequenced it. So let's look at the prologue here. So in the prologue, students have to identify what is their human right. They have to talk about where, who, how, why it's happening, and provide 5 compelling statistics. Did you notice I already deconstructed this first prologue for them, and then I sequenced the order in which students have to write? Isn't that cool? So you can even do this at at a document level, at a smaller document level. Let's move to the next part. So after they write the prologue, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to identify what part of the children's book do they have to write, in what order. So again, I deconstructed and I sequenced it. For example, in this children's story, they first have to introduce the character and the setting for me. Then they're going to have to introduce their family members for me. Next, they're going to have to give me a problem, because we have character, we have setting, and then we have problem. Of course, the last one would be solution. Do you see I'm already sequencing things for students? And then the last one, epilogue. So this is the third person writing. Students have to analyze their short story, writing epilogue for readers. So I already sequenced it for them. Paragraph 1, 2, and 3. Paragraph 1, students have to talk about what they as authors wanted readers to know about their children's story. Paragraph 2, they have to persuade readers that this right must be universal. So they're persuading at this part. And 3, they have to identify what factors prevented people from having access. Is it cultural, religious, political? So you notice how I'm structuring the document for students. I'm deconstructing what they have to do, such as here, prologue, children's story, epilogue. But I'm also doing that within the smaller parts. Let me show you the document itself. Well, actually, you're already seeing it. The reason why I do this is, let's say that I co-planned this with my teacher. Now that I have this, it's going to help students for the rest of the unit. Even if I'm not there in a particular day when they're writing their paragraph 2, it's already structured for them. Or if I'm not there when we're doing paragraph 3, it's already structured for them. Because I've noticed that sometimes teachers will say, oh, I just want students to analyze. Remember to analyze in the epilogue. What we're doing during our co-planning is saying, tell me more about what you expect in the analysis. And then teachers will say, oh, well, I want them to talk about the cultural, religious, and political or social factors that have impacted people's access to human rights. Now, let me show you at the elementary school what this would look like. I know I'm talking a lot. In a few minutes, we're going to be going into a small group chat with everybody. Okay? A small group, we'll have 2 small groups. This is from Katie Topple, a fabulous teacher. Dr. Katie Topple is one of my co-authors. She's fabulous. I love her. I've learned so much from her about how to teach elementary school students. She did this as well. Let's look at this paragraph here. She deconstructed and sequenced the kind of writing she wanted students to produce about paleontologists. First, she has to say what's the job of a paleontologist. First, and the next part, she said, okay, I want students to talk about the different tools that students are using. First, they can use a chisel so they can dig. They can also use goggles so that they can protect their eyes. When they find a fossil, they use blank blank so they can. Do you see all the ways? So this is the structure I'm seeing. She's intentional with deconstructing the task and sequencing the writing she wants students to do. First, tell me what the paleontologist does. Then, in the middle, tell me all they use, all the tools, and why they use them. And then end with a finally. And how does she get this? How can she structure this? By the way, let me tell you. Even if she's not there in the class, because she created this document with her teacher, she is there through co-teaching because she co-planned this document to scaffold the learning for students. That's how effective and powerful co-planning can be. Let me show you what she did, how she got there. So if the writing part is the end product, how does she get there? How do students know that paleontologist looks for a fossil? How did the kids know that they used a chisel and goggles? Well, they read it in an article. So this is the original article that students had. And Dr. Katie Topple, just added a little word bank here. Because she teaches kindergarten, she then took the text here. Paleontologists have a cool job because they get to look at fossils. She took that sentence and she put it over here. Paleontologists, here's a paleontologist, have a cool job, here's the job, because they get to look for fossils. Then the next part. First, they look for a location with evidence of a fossil. Do you notice how fossil is repeated here to help them understand? Here, what I'm seeing, let me back away. Let me back up and explain what I think she's doing. She is now deconstructing the reading for students and sequencing the reading for students. Now, the next part, what she did was, okay, she said, now we just read about paleontologists, and I want students to get to the end to do writing. What's in between? Oh, this is maybe the structured brainstorming. So she created this brainstorming document so that her teachers, even if she's not there, can use this with students. So for example, paleontologist, this is called the sentence patterning chart. Paleontologist, that's the noun, use, verb, and here are all the tools they use. And over here is the connection, is the transition, so they can, it's a compound sentence. What are students doing? What are they, so they can do what? Oh, so they can protect their eyes, they can paint, they can dig, they can measure, they can draw pictures. She's doing all of this to scaffold the writing. Because she deconstructed, she said, okay, if this is the goal at the end, let me deconstruct what that means. Well, they have to read, and they'll probably have to talk to brainstorm. So then she deconstructed and sequenced each of those parts there. Before we go into our group activity, can you type in the group chat, what do you notice about what I just shared here so far? What did you notice about what I just shared with my example and also Katie's example? Here they come. Sorry, that's my alarm. Expectations, Ricardo. Great. Can you say a little more? Can you type in the group chat? That'd be wonderful. Miriam said, There is very clear structure which can be applied later. Yes, Miriam. When we co-plan this way, it actually builds and adds tools to teachers' toolkit so that there are tool belts or toolboxes so they can use this in the future. This is great. Diane said, provide students with a model of high expectations. Yes, we're always thinking about, okay, you are developing English learner or a multilingual student, you're developing acquisition of English. The standard is the same. The mountaintop is high. We're just providing a different path and more tools to get to the mountaintop. And Alice said, ELL students are leveled scaffolds. Yours seem higher, Katie seems lower. That's exactly it. Yay, Alice. Do you notice how I just love that? You notice that the same thing is the concept, is the principle of deconstructing our assessment, providing prompts. My prompts are written, but Katie's prompt for elementary school is still using prompts here, using pictures here. That's exactly it. Yes. Sarah said, it's a scaffold which isn't complicated to follow, easy to administer. Yes. When it's easy for co-teachers to administer, they'll be more likely to do that and to apply later for students so they feel confident to follow that structure. High five, Sarah. Thanks. Ricardo added and explained too. Provide students with resources. Provide students with resources, a model, and yes, the path to reach the objectives that have been set. I love that. Thank you so much for that. I agree with Ricardo. Okay, where I've talked a lot right now. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to go into a small group activity. What you're going to do is I'm going to put you into, I think there's 10 people. Wonderful. Hi, Sage. Good to see you. Your colleagues will help you here because we just learned about high yield co-planning, which is focusing on the assessment. What we're going to do is we're going to work with each other. Don't worry, Sage, it's not a problem. You're going to be in your groups. For example, let's say that Ricardo and Alice and Sage are together. They're going to write their names here. Whatever the group number is the group number you're going to be working, the table you're going to be working in. You're going to type in your names here like this. And let's say that one person volunteers to describe an assessment. For example, Alice might say, by the end of this unit in grade, by the end of this grade 5 unit, students will produce a poster to demonstrate their understanding of the ecosystem, or the food web, right? And then we think about, okay, if students have to create a poster to demonstrate their understanding of the ecosystem, what are the different parts that we have to deconstruct for them and sequence for students to be able to be successful? That's all you have to do. And then we'll come back to the group and then we'll assess, we'll look at how you did this together. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. You can feel free to mute your mic. This is wonderful. Let me share with you the work that I saw just now as I was working. I didn't go into any of your groups because I could see that you were working in the small groups here by looking at your document. Let's look at Ricardo, Binju, Sarah, and Ivy's work. So they said by the end of this grade 5 unit, students will produce a brochure to demonstrate their understanding of traveling through description and persuasion. So they're going to have to write about traveling, but they're going to be persuasive and descriptive. So let's look at how they deconstruct the writing. First, they're going to have to research brochures, and they're going to have to contact travel agents. Next, they're going to have to identify items for students from students' countries. Ooh, that's nice. Elements of the brochure, they're going to have to highlight destinations to visit, information, climate, and then they're going to teach persuasion later. Let's look at Miriam's and Magda's. By Sage as well. By the end of grade 1 unit, students will produce the riddle to demonstrate their understanding of Malaysian animals. How cute. So here's how they can sequence. Hi, Kim, welcome. Here's how they can sequence. Use of I pronoun, adjectives, verbs, am, live, have, into fun and information and fun facts. How clear is this? Like, I can see this becoming a lesson here. The lesson of am, the lesson of live, and the lesson of have. Let's look at Alice, Diana, and Micah's work. By the end of this grade 4 unit of space, students will produce a collection of poems to demonstrate their understanding of literary devices and space information based on research. So look at all of this here. Just because they wrote this, I now know for the entire unit what I'm going to have to do. It's about space, the content. The product or its collection of poems. The content as well, the skill is literary devices and research. Let's see how they deconstructed it. First, they review the previous knowledge information of figurative language. Whole group, small group, one at a time. They're going to have to know what students know about figurative language. Next, they're going to practice and share examples of different literary devices by reading different poems. Great. And they're going to do that whole group and small group. Look here, they're going to talk, this is where they're teaching the poem part. They're going to model practice writing poems on their own, whole group or small group. So this is the part of the middle. And closer towards the end, they're going to read space information. So it seems like right here, the first part, they're learning about literary devices and poetry. But the next part, they're going to learn about researching about space. Oh, at the same time. They're going to do it at the same time. I love that. In different classes. Okay, I get it. They're going to focus on research skills and support vocabulary and scaffold the reading strategies to find targeted information. Yes, they're doing this as an interdisciplinary unit, it seems like. Okay. Let's type in the group chat. Now that you went through this experience, what do you notice when we deconstruct, in sequence, and assessment this way? What do you notice when we co-plan with this approach of coming together and deconstructing an assessment and creating it together? Can you type in the group chat, everyone? Okay. Sage said, it can be really quick. I love this, Sage. Yes, it can be so quick. And the best part is it has to be quick because we have so few minutes, precious minutes to co-plan with our teachers. When we co-plan this way, we maximize and capitalize and multiply every single minute we have. Sarah said, ownership for all, including the co-teachers as well as you. Yes. Micah said, it makes it manageable. Chunking information into parts. Yes. When you can chunk something, that is something you can scaffold, right? For example, let's look here. When we are going to be when we have chunked out figurative language, like practice and share examples of different literary devices, right there, we can scaffold that. Right? This is how you can become an equal designer of instruction. Alice said, every person involved in the teaching knows their role and what they need to do. Yes. So the content teacher or your co-teachers is giving you the context of space, the context of literary devices. You as a language specialist, you're contributing to how can I scaffold this for students? How can I add the prompts? How can I add the visuals? That's fantastic. Miriam, the task can be very broken down into specific lessons. Miriam, nice. Just like I shared over here, where every lesson now can be broken up into the smaller granular parts because we know that's what the assessment is. Alice, don't worry about it. It was my reading. Amy, thank you for coming. And sorry that you came later in the session, but wonderful that you're here. Awareness of the process and learning outcomes for all. When we are aware of the learning outcomes, we can scaffold for the learning outcome. I am so impressed, Amy, that you just came, but you're able to pick that up so fast.
I'm late. I got my times all mixed up here in Korea.
No worries. Good to see you. Not a problem. I did too. I just want to share with you my document here that I'm actually working with my grade 6. Right. So as you see, this is justice of relevance for it's a criteria in the MYP for the individuals and societies. I created this document months before our unit started because I knew that JOR 1, JOR 2, JOR 3, JOR 4 is all here. So that basically means like, oh, okay, we're going to talk about globalization here. We're going to give an example of the past and the present. I even here, this is an example of how I supported students. Let's say that my teacher is now on JOR 3. Let's say that Alice and I co-planned together, and Alice said, at this point, I want students to be able to talk about what are the benefits of globalization for multinational companies? What are the benefits for workers as well? So we talked about it, and I said, okay, cool. How are we going to help them? Well, I figured out that they needed images to help them understand, like statistics here and a statistic here. They're going to have to use these statistics to talk about how globalization benefits companies. So that's, even if I'm not there in the classroom, I've already created this for students to guide them. And I connected the YouTube video just if they needed one more time. Here in paragraph 2, I did the same thing. I said, this is a visual scaffold to say, talk about how globalization has benefited workers. Talking specifically about Aki Actor. Here's a video if you need it again. That's awesome. That's example of, this is my actual example of my what I give students. And I planned this backwards. This document is like a stone. In each of these things is a different lesson. So this will take like total 2 weeks to do, because this is lesson 1, this is lesson 2. I only have 2 lessons per week with my students. And you notice all the prompts that I put in? For example, here, when you watch this video, make sure you talk about where cotton is grown, how it's processed, where it's sewn, and who sews it. And also talk about a statistic about how much carbon emission has been produced. That's the scaffolding you can do with teachers. Whew, this is going so fast. I'm loving this. I only have 10 minutes left, so let's continue on with the next part. So let me review very quickly for those teachers who are just new. We talked about one strategy that is called high yield co-planning, which is saying, let's focus on the assessment when we co-plan. And if we are to focus on the assessment, let's deconstruct and sequence the parts of the assessment to scaffold and make learning possible for students. The next thing I want to share is called content, process, and product. This comes from Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson. I love her. She uses as a way of differentiating, but what I do actually is I use this as a structure for planning. I sit with teachers and I say, tell me the content you want students to learn. Tell me what students are going to be producing by the end. And then how are they doing this? Right. I kind of already did that within here. Watch. By end of grade 4, unit space, students will produce, that's the product, poem to demonstrate their understanding of literary devices. Space is the content. Poem is the product. And they're going to research, which is the process. Right? Let me continue here. So when I look at these things, I say, okay, when the teacher tells me the content, I think to myself, what can I do to make the content accessible? In particular, content-specific words. When the teacher tells me the product, I think about, okay, how can I scaffold the language that's used in the final product? Notice I'm not differentiating here at all. I'm simply thinking about what can I do to help students? And then the process, when the teacher tells me the process, I think to myself, how can I scaffold the steps students will have to follow to complete the assignment? That's how I co-plan with teachers. I think about, I ask them for their content, I ask them for the product, and I ask them for the process. Hey, Stacy, good to see you. Let me give you an example of content, product, and process. My 7th grade teacher in social studies said, okay, students are going to be learning about how dams affect rivers, river communities. Okay, here's a picture of that. And for my students who just came from China, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, okay, we're going to learn about rivers in China. Would you like to learn about the Huanghe River or the Yangtze River? Right? So here I'm not differentiating the content for them. I'm making it accessible by saying, we're going to learn about rivers. And then let me go to the process. When it's time for the process, sorry, I need to turn that off. When I'm learning about the process, students are going to be researching. All students are going to be researching. But for some of my Chinese students, just to amplify their multilingualism, they are going to research in Chinese or in whatever language that best suits them. And then, so here's an example of researching in Chinese. And then the final product, students have to create an essay. Let's just say that you have a beginner student who's not able to produce an essay at this time, but they're able to learn about how damming impact rivers. They're able to understand that concept. They're able to research in their heritage language. They're not able to write an extensive 1,000 word essay. Instead, what can you do? Oh, well, this might be the differentiation part for my students. I would have them, and this is what I actually did with my student, Zhang Hong. He actually went and researched in Chinese about the Yellow River, and then he Google Translate his text that he found that he wrote in Chinese into English. You're going to see that it's grammatically not correct, but the content and the processing is. Let's watch.
Hello, my name is Chen Huang. Today, I would like to brief you on the ecology impact of dam. Before the dam, for beautiful city. After the dam, where the water is us, the land is air.
Did you notice that?
My name is.
Oh, let me show you here where he said here. Before the dam, then after the dam. This shows the student is quite intelligent, being able to show transition in time. But then also look at this word. The land is arid. That means that student intentionally used the word arid in Chinese. How wonderful it is for a student to demonstrate their intelligence and their literacy using their heritage language. This student was successful because we figured out the content, we figured out the product, and then I supported the student through the process of doing this. And the teacher high-fived to him, was like, yes, the student is not going to be able to write a 1,000-word essay. Let's differentiate the product so that the student creates an animated video while keeping the content, while keeping the process the same, researching. Both keeping the skills there, keeping the content there. The only difference is how we support the process. So let me share with you the next, actually, let me have you pause and reflect. What do you notice about when we co-plan with our teachers using content, product, and process? And then this is what Kim said. Scaffolding helps both teachers and students succeed in their learning, teaching and learning. Yes, when we figure out what the content, product, and process, we figure out where we can be in that time, in our role in supporting that. Bintu said, it's clear steps for success. Yes, when we have this, it really helps our steps. And then Sage says, there is more focus on what the children are doing. I love that. Yes. When we can focus on what students are doing, we can figure out what we are doing. Hey, Ricardo, welcome back. Sarah said, not a problem, no worries. Sarah said, all students have an equitable path to reach their final product. Ownership for all, planning, and clear planning for teachers and students. Yes. I want to say that Sarah, you're helping me think about something here. I used to think that our job is to help students acquire a language, and now I'm starting to realize that it's about providing equitable learning experiences. Just because they're developing English skills doesn't mean they should not have the same expectations. And when we do this, we're providing equitable learning experiences. Alice said, my favorite part is working on the product based upon the content process, especially with beginners. It's amazing what they are able to produce in the end, just like your Chinese student. Everyone feels an accomplishment. Yes, the saddest part is when students leave their school as a #1 student in their class, then they come to our new school, and because of their English level, they're on the bottom. But when we help them do this in this way, scaffold the lessons in this way, they start to regain their confidence and their competence to show students that you are not less because you're developing English skills. Yes. Kim said, intention of helping students to succeed is apparent. It's all about the intentionality. Miriam said, developing independence in students. That's exactly right. And Micah said that. Hi, Xiaji. Micah said, this approach is totally strengths-based assets. It's all about strengths-based. Hi, Siaji, good to see you.
Hey,
We're now going to go to the next. So let me just review for those who are here, who just came. So we looked at high-yield co-planning, meaning focusing on the assessment. We deconstructed the assessment. And then we looked at content, product, and process. I'm going to help move to the next part, which is called WIDA key usage. And this is thinking about what's the language that's involved in the assessment. So let me go here for you. WIDA has 4 big buckets or categories of language. They went and they researched the language that's used from K to 12 and in college. And they realized that these are the 4 buckets. When you're writing or producing language, you're either informing, narrating, explaining, and arguing. Of course, they can be blended in a single document, but this is the different language functions that students are going to be using. Language moves, really. So let's look at here. Let's look at migration. Let me give an example. Yep, feel free to type in the group chat. What might students have to do if they're informing people about migration? I'll give you an example. They might say a statistic. How many people migrate from where to where? Yes, facts and data. You read my mind. Describing the process. Yes. Right? You can even describe the process of push and pull factors. Right? Let me give you an example. Let me move to reading the timeline. Yes. Let me move to narrate. For example, let's say that the teacher wants students to narrate something about migration. They might pick a story of a person who has migrated, or talk about a refugee. So they're going to turn a person's experience into a short story. Let's go to explain for migration. Let's pretend that your teacher says, okay, I want you to explain the reasons why people migrate. So that's explain. And then argue. And it might be, let's have a debate. Should countries open their borders to refugees? Should countries open their borders to more refugees? So when I think about this, when I work with teachers and I co-plan with them, I always figure out, okay, what kind of WIDA key uses are you doing? Do you want students to inform, to narrate, to explain, or to argue? Why do I do that? Because this helps me figure out how I can help scaffold students' work. For example, here, let's look at the inform. If students are doing inform, I'm going to have to figure out how I can teach them about statistics, because there are statistics here. Let's say that the teacher wants students to narrate. I'm going to have to figure out, okay, I'm going to have to help scaffold the characters, the setting, the climax, the resolution. So I'm thinking about that as I plan with my teacher. Let's say that the teacher wants to talk about reasons why people migrate. Right? So I'm going to have to teach students pull and push factors and give them examples of that. I'm going to also have to help them use the word language of like, because, or people migrate because one of the reasons, an additional reason is because of climate disasters, this has cause. So I'm helping them use cause and effect language when they're writing. Let's say students are arguing. How can we help migrants? What's the best way we can help refugees? Right? So what they're going to do is I'm going to have to teach them how to use persuasive language in their writing or their presentation. Once my teacher says, okay, the end of the unit, students are going to have to argue about what we can do to support refugees. What's the best thing we can do as international school students to support refugees? They're going to write a report about that. Right? I now know that my mind is not about narrating. It's really about how can I use persuasive language. That's what I do with when I co-plan. Let me go to the last one, perfect timing to end at 9:45 my time. I want to share with you the next thing is called discourse, sentence, and word phrase level. This comes from Dr. Gottlieb and Ernst Slavitt. They talked about language as different levels. There's the word phrase level, which is content-specific words. There's the sentence level, and then there's the discourse level. The sentence level is just how are you using the content-specific words? Is it recall, explain, argue, discuss? Very similar to what we did here. And then how are they going to put it all together? Are they just writing a single sentence, or is there a structure to this sentence, then that sentence, then finally this sentence? So when I work with my teachers, like say for example, they're going to be arguing. I'm going to have to figure out, are they going to do the pro first, or are they going to do the con first? That's the discourse, right? Here, let me give you an example here. When I look at the phrase level, I say, what words are students supposed to use about migration? They're going to have to use the word pull and push factor. I know about that. At the sentence level, I say this, how should this sentence sound? So I think about how might the sentence sound when we're talking about, when we're persuading people. You might say, not only, in addition to, right? So that's how you do it. The discourse level is, how should this section be organized? What sentence should go first? What second sentence should go next? Let me give you an example here. I kind of already showed you this. This is my JROR number 3, and I want my students to write about outsourcing as a benefit of globalization, but outsourcing also helping people in developing countries. So let me show you here. The word level is, they're going to have to use the word outsourcing, globalization, and garment workers. That's why I have the picture of garment workers here and a clear definition of outsourcing. The sentence level, they're going to have to talk about the hourly wage of workers in Sweden, but the monthly salary of the people in Bangladesh. And the discourse means, okay, they're first going to have to talk about the companies only, and in the second paragraph, they're going to have to talk about the workers only. So this is how I structured it. Let me give you an example of this writing from one of my more proficient students. I'll read it to you, and you can see here how I structured it: word, sentence, and discourse. Globalization benefits companies through outsourcing. Here's the word level. A way to hire people. Outsourcing is hiring people from developing countries because it is much cheaper to pay labor there rather than the country where it's more developing country. H&M, a clothing company, moved factories to Bangladesh in order to pay less money for employees, as seen in the video. Some of these countries gain a drastic difference in payment. $68 paid in a month in Bangladesh just for stitching clothes. $68 a month is less than the national poverty level of $78. When this is discovered by huge companies, they will want to get the best opportunity to move their products into their country. Not much money is needed for paying employees. This example of globalization benefits companies much because paying less money for wages would mean that they can spend more money on materials or things they need for the company. Alongside globalization benefit companies, it also benefits workers there. Do you notice how, because I figured out the word, sentence, and discourse level, students are writing quite proficiently? And look how they're using the facts here, because I have scaffolded their work for them here in this document. So when I co-plan with my teachers this document, I think about that. I think about the word, what words are students using? How might they use that? Or what facts are they using here? That's the sentence level. And then what paragraph should they write? In what order? So in essence, you have just learned things that took me years to figure out, and I'm still figuring out, about co-planning. These are my go-to when I co-plan with teachers. And when I do this, when I plan in this way, it's so much more effective than planning tomorrow's lessons, today's lesson. It's saying, what do students need to do by the end of the unit? Let's start right there. Again, friends, thank you for showing up on a Saturday. Who does that? Teachers who care about their kids a lot. Thank you so much. And ELLSA team, thank you for making this happen today. Wishing you all the best.